On today's episode, Melinda sits down with three incredible adoptees to listen to their stories of struggle, hope, identity, and belonging. And Melinda shares her personal story of adoption. It's all right here on See Hear Love.
You are seen, you are heard, you are loved by God. You're not alone, you're fully known, you are loved by God.
Well, welcome to See Hear Love. I'm your host, Melinda, and this is a very special show for me, a very personal show, because it's about adoption. And for many of you who've been journeying with me on See Hear Love for a while, you will know that I was adopted at 1 week old out of the Abiartis House of Friendship in Quezon City in the Philippines. And so this show comes out of really a chance for me to hear from other adoptees about their journey, about their struggles with identity and belonging, and how they have taken their journeys and stories and made something really beautiful and good with their experiences. You know, there are thousands of kids in Canada and in the United States and around the world that are waiting to be adopted. Thousands in foster care, and millions of kids on the street and homeless around the world. And so this story, this show and these stories are meant to bring awareness about hopefully the need for adoption, but also for those that are adopted to know that you're not alone, that what you're feeling is what I've felt and what our next guests coming up have felt too. So let's get started with our first guest, Andrew Rienstra, internationally adopted from Costa Rica, as he shares his story of otherness, belonging, and struggle. Let's hear from Andrew. So I'm looking so forward to hearing the story of this guest of mine, Andrew Rienstra, adopted internationally. And I don't want to fill in any more gaps, Andrew, because I need you to fill them in. But thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me, Melinda. I'm really excited to be here and share a bit about my story. And I guess I'll just kind of start out with the beginning. So I'm, as you mentioned, adopted internationally. I was adopted by missionaries from the Christian Reformed Church in Michigan, who went down to Costa Rica in Central America and served there for 10 years as missionaries. As part of their sort of investment in the community there, they pursued adoption. And so they adopted myself and two of my siblings. Yeah. And
wow.
we ended up actually living then in Costa Rica for a good amount of my childhood. Till I was about 10 or 11 years old. And so that experience, I feel like in some ways is different than some international adoption stories where, you know, for example, a child is taken from one country and immediately brought to the United States or to Canada. So I felt very blessed to grow up in that environment, especially also having my biological siblings. As far as like, you know, tapping into the next piece of identity, you know, my story, it felt like that. Like there were several chapters to it. The first chapter, you know, I just lived adoption. Adoption was something that just happened to me. You know, my parents, from the way beginning, my parents were a different skin color than me. So I was very aware that, you know, like these are not my biological mother and father. My sister was also aware and had memories of her birth parents. So growing up, you know, from the way beginning, there was no not living as an adopted person. And for the very, you know, for a very long time in my life, that's just, it felt like adoption was something that happened to me, not something that I necessarily explored or something that I necessarily thought about. It just was. It was just kind of like the air I breathed, you know? And so, you know, I grew up in Costa Rica, and then was brought to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where, you know, I was brought from that sort of international context to a very predominantly Caucasian context. So my family, as I mentioned, my adoptive family, they are missionaries from a group called the Christian Reformed Church in North America, and that group is descendants of Dutch immigrants to Michigan and, you know, other parts of Canada and the United States. And so when they brought us from, you know, Costa Rica to the United States, we ended up living in a community that was predominantly Dutch.
And Dutch and white, which I totally get. It was the same as me when I lived in the Philippines, and very multicultural, multi-ethnicity experiences and came to Canada in mid 80s and landed in an all Caucasian white environment and neighborhood. And for the first time, I was really a standout as far as my own color and upbringing,
Yes.
which was difficult. But go ahead. Sorry to insert, but I was just like, yes, we have some connection points here.
No, it's well, I'll talk
Mhm.
about the group we created later. Maybe you should join. It'll be cool.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, talking about that, that experience of transitioning from a very international life to a, honestly, for the most part, a bubble of one ethnicity, being Caucasian here in the United States. That Caucasian bubble, I stuck out,
Yeah.
and I actually remember a clear moment in my middle school years where it hit me. And we were playing broom ball, which is kind of similar to hockey. I'm sure Canadians are very familiar with
Mhm.
ice related sports. So yeah, I was out there on the hockey rink, and I looked down at my broom ball pole, and I looked up, and all of a sudden I just noticed, I was like, no one here looks like me. There are
Mhm.
like 60 people here, and no one looks like me. Everyone was Caucasian, and that to me, as I mentioned a little bit ago, adoption was something that happened to me. It was just the air I breathed, the water I lived in. It wasn't something I always thought about, but that started waking me up to seeing my life as something that doesn't just have to happen to me, but something I can participate in.
Oh, that's
And
good. Mhm.
acknowledging that, like, what I went through wasn't quote unquote normal. I don't think there is a normal in 2021, but I was very aware as a child, like, to minimize myself, to kind of ignore things that happened, especially things that were racially motivated or
Mm.
things that made me feel uncomfortable about my story. It's just kind of like, just put your head down and keep going. But
Yeah. So Andrew, sorry. So,
yeah.
we're talking this identity.
Mhm.
So we are like brown, and yet we're living in an all white household in an all white neighborhood. What did that do with identity in the sense of like who you are? I know that you've alluded to that, but I think that's really important because sometimes it felt fractured for me, or sometimes it was like, am I an imposter in this own world? And yet very grateful that I was adopted. I mean, all these thoughts and feelings in my head. Uh, how did you feel with that? I mean, was there ever a time where you're like, I wish I wasn't adopted, or was there always I'm grateful for it. I've just got to figure out how to navigate through some of these challenges.
Yeah. So as I keep referring to it, like, my life kind of happened in chapters. And that
Hmm.
first chapter was just kind of like, put your head down and just kind of go with
Okay.
the flow. Ignore the pain, ignore the questions, just survive.
Hmm.
And um, when I came to Michigan, and it just became more and more, and I got older, I was older when I came to Michigan and started questioning things, and really reflecting on things that happened to me. Feeling othered was a big one. It's like, I didn't feel like the people who were around me 100% accepted me. My story to this day is very mixed.
Hmm.
I don't pass, well, as a Dutch Caucasian person. I'm never going to be that. And so when I'm in those spaces, people zoom in on me. When I walked into church as a child with my family, people, if I'm in the supermarket, if I'm at a restaurant, when I'm in this community here where it's a little bit more homogenous, it was something that, yeah, I would just feel. And for a long time, I just kept my head down and ignored it. But then, yeah, through my high school years, and then especially in college, I really started thinking through and moving into having more agency with my adoption. I started asking more questions and pursuing, like, okay, I've felt like an outsider, I've been hurt, I want to stand up for myself, I want to help
Mm.
myself, I don't want to be angry or sad or hurt anymore. I want to work through this emotional journey and this identity journey so that I can become, the person that God sees me as. Because,
Yeah.
a big part of my journey as adoption, I've seen, has actually been the journey of discovering God's love for me. I think that a lot
Oh,
of times,
yeah.
yeah,
That's I love that. I love that. I think, I've never heard that, Andrew, about that I decided to, take agency of it to it's really this intentional act to say I'm going to own it and embrace it versus what I love that it was sort of like it happened to me. I was adopted. It was sort of out of my control as a baby. And now as an adult, I'm going to embrace it and wrestle through it. That's really beautiful. I haven't heard that. That's right on. That's really good. Uh, Wow. So it's this otherness, the understanding of God within, adoption. I want to talk about that because I think there's something very connected to adoption, and our faith.
Mhm.
The whole adoption part. And I think that over the years would sometimes give me just a moment of connection, right? When I was sort of like not connected with God or not connected with my family, somehow that would kind of come up in my mind. And I'd know that there was some kind of spiritual overarching connection with adoption. What would you say about that? That there's something there, something really special.
Oh, I completely agree. I've had, throughout my life, the opportunity to see firsthand the brokenness of my story. And I'll break that out, right? So I've found my birth mother. She lives in Costa Rica in a very remote part, very, very poor, way different life than I would have ever led. I live in the United States. I live with, in a mostly Caucasian community. I have access to things and privileges that my family back home would only dream about. I've also met my birth father's side and his culture. He's an indigenous person in Nicaragua. And actually,
Wow.
flying back from Nicaragua, as I was flying from where my birth dad lived in a very remote area, I began to just honestly get overwhelmed with emotion and this feeling of brokenness, right? Like my story can never be back whole, right? Like it felt like
Mhm.
that. Like it felt like this broken jar, where I have love and for people in all these different places and these experiences, all these different places, and I'm part of all these different places. And what is it in me that is, like I'm broken. But then I had this very clear visual of God being this great potter and putting me back together,
Oh,
saying,
love
I
that.
am the connection. I am the
Hmm.
one who's fixing your story. And this story may be complex, but it's amazing because that's how I am. And to me, that overcame a lot of that brokenness feeling. And I've owned that now. And I look at a lot of the people who I've read about in the Bible, their stories weren't simple either. I don't know why there's this idea that life should be simple. Like,
Exactly. That there will be suffering, you guys, that there will be difficulty. Like, I don't know where we got this idea of that everything was going to be fantastic, great, and easy.
mhm, yeah. And that you were supposed to have like this life that was just linear. I look
Right.
at that's just that my faith has shown me that the thing to hold on through anything is God
Mhm.
creates the linearness. Everything else is up for grabs, and in
Right,
my
right.
story, yeah.
So, Andrew, this is beautiful. And then what I love about this is as you're going through these challenges and struggle, you decide to create, found a group, of adopted kids in your area. I love that. I'm always about like if we see a need, let's fill it. If there's something that's missing, you could be the answer to the prayer of that. And so, talk to me about that because I think that's wonderful that in your journey
Mhm.
you decide to do this.
Well, I think it starts again with, and I apologize, I'm a long-winded person. I tell
It's
stories in
okay.
kind of
I know
complicated.
your total story to get, don't worry. My team knows that. I go on and on and on in my interviews. So
Well, with this
but
one,
go ahead.
what I see when it comes to issues around being a person of color in communities that you're maybe not accepted in, like here in the one I was in the United States, or if you have, adoption in your story, or just feelings of otherness, that's a place that evil, will fester. It's a place that evil
Mm,
wants you in. Evil wants you to feel alone, that you have no hope, that no one can relate to you, that you are in this and it's just your lot in life and you're going to suffer. And I feel like God is a redeeming God, right? And I looked at my story in the past, for that moment, like, wow, it's broken. But it's like, no, it's incredible. I
mhm,
can't believe all this stuff happened to me. It could have been a
mhm.
broken story, but God worked
Yes.
through all these people to make me, and bring me here and bring me to where I'm at. And so I see a lot of adopted kids, a lot of people who are people of color or transracial adoptees who have, I'll be honest, at a place where I was, where they feel alone,
Okay.
they're in pain. Um, Dealing with this stuff, you can ignore it, but I just feel like it's so important to create a space for people to come out and engage and talk with one another. And
Right.
I found that out just through relating to other adoptees. It all began actually with humor. A woman and I, she was a Korean adopted person. We were at church together, and we just started telling each other some jokes that weren't jokes. They were basically microaggressions that we'd experienced, comments from Caucasian people at the church, that we both could instantly relate to. These were painful experiences, but we could laugh it off together. And we were like, wow, if you're going through this and I'm going through this, I've been suffering, you've been suffering, and now we're laughing about it and we're moving past it.
Mhm.
Let's keep doing this. And I know other adoptees, let's bring those people in. And so
Wow.
we sort of laughed in that face of loneliness, laughed in that face of otherness, laughed in the face of racism. And it's worked. Like our group is not a therapy group. It's more just a, meet up with people who are adopted, and I guess all on this identity journey together. And
Yeah, it's
that's
wonderful.
yeah.
So, and they just find you how?
I usually either one, I find them, like I'm
Okay.
very open to just talking with people, and if people have adoption stories, I'll share mine, and people will, want to open up about theirs, or we'll advertise, so we've
Okay.
done some things on social media, and we're interested in getting new people involved. It's something that I find very important and very healing.
Right.
We
Amazing.
don't, yeah, I think I would make one big distinction, with our group. I've really felt that people leave feeling community over just feeling questions or pain or
Right.
hurt. That can be a piece of the time we spend together, but I've found that there's just so much healing that happens in community, because like I said,
sure.
that darkness likes to fester and keep us
Yeah.
apart and feeling, just sad, hurt, and alone. So
Yeah. So, two quick things, Andrew, I want to ask. Number one, are you grateful and thankful that you were adopted?
that's a tricky question.
Mhm.
I am, but it's also something that I'm realizing, that God blesses all people. So I don't look down at my birth family and say I escaped something, I think that I could have had a relationship with God there. I could have had laughs there. I could have had,
Right.
hugs and wonderful experiences there. So I grew up very much believing I had escaped something, but going and actually meeting them, I'm realizing I'm just in a different something. And so I'm grateful for the life I have, but I know that it's dishonoring to God to say that the life that they have is not good and I
Mm.
escaped it. So I'm grateful for what I have, but
Yeah.
I'd also be grateful, and I hope that I would be grateful if I was there, So
That's
it's
a
a
good
mix.
perspective. I like that. And then, second of all, for an adopted kid who is struggling today, who is struggling with identity and otherness, maybe has not found their birth family, maybe will never, encouragement to them today, from your own experience.
Well, the biggest thing I want to say is you're not alone. You know, try and find people online. I think that the internet is an amazing resource for finding other adoptees, groups, people who are going through something similar. Um, don't give up on yourself and what you can go through. What seems like an end can be a new beginning. Um, I think honestly, just increase your relationship with God. Always be walking with the Lord and for His direction with your life and your emotions and your spiritual health. I couldn't have done any of the transformation that's happened in my life without the Lord. So I believe,
Mm.
just go walking with God is one of the most important things. So yeah, I'd also say don't look towards human beings for acceptance. Look towards what God says about you and who you are, down to the way you look. You are beautifully and wonderfully made. So don't look to the people around you for what is a beauty standard or a handsomeness standard or height standard or anything. Look to
Height, you got it. I know. As someone who's like under 5 foot, thank you for that reminder, Andrew.
Yeah.
Because that's always been that thing. Andrew, thank you so much. So many good takeaways from your story. So many things that actually captured me, that really struck me in about not looking at my birth family as like, oh, I'm glad I escaped that, or wasn't as good as the life I have. But in all things, that it would have been a different experience for me if I'd stayed with my birth family. But wow, what an incredible story! You're an incredible man, and I'm so grateful that you were here today to share your story, to give encouragement. I love the imagery of the pottery, and beautiful. So hopefully we can connect again, because I have so much more to tell about my own story of adoption. I'd love to join your group, and we'll have to make sure that we connect again. But thank you for all you do. God bless you in your life and the work that you do as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Melinda. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much.
From the host of See Hear Love, Melinda Estabrooks, and 50 of her guests and friends comes the book Always Know, full of stories of lives that are inspiring, wise, and life-changing.
God hears you. He hears your prayers. He hears the longing for connection. He hears the cries of pain that you're experiencing, and He loves you deeply.
This month, with your ministry gift of $25 or more, or when you become a new monthly donor, request your copy of Always Know.
It is a collection of stories to help you today in the things that you're struggling with, the things that you are confronted with. And I know that these stories will encourage you.
Call 1-800-265-3100 or visit seehearlove.com/alwaysknow and request your copy.
Julie is Jeremy's birth mother, who she gave up for adoption when she was 16 years old. And Julie and Jeremy, I'm so glad that you're with us today here on See Hear Love, because I'm so interested and excited to hear your story, Jeremy, about your story of being adopted and identity, and Julie, your story as a birth mother. So Jeremy, you are adopted. I want to hear about your story. You know, this show is about, identity and belonging as an adopted kid. It's sort of a spotlight and highlight on kids that were adopted. So tell me at what age you found out you're adopted, and what was sort of the process of you growing up knowing that you were adopted?
I don't remember a time that I didn't know. It was very important to Julie when I was adopted that I always knew, and it wasn't some big secret that I found out later on in my life. So I'd always known kind of that's where I came from. And to me, it was almost a cool story. It didn't as much seem reality because I was so out of touch with it. But I was always told that I looked like my parents as well, which again was another one of Julie's plans. She wanted me to be with people who I would try to fit in with, and I didn't feel so out of place.
So were you at all, when people found out, was there any bullying or anything that made you feel like, oh, wait, I don't belong, or maybe I was unwanted, or any of those kinds of feelings that you might have experienced?
Personally, no. When, if anyone ever did try to make fun of me, I would say, well, I was chosen.
Yes.
And that would kind of shut everything down.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I would say. And it was actually really bad, because when my sister and brother and I would get into a fight, Jeremy, we would fight. And I have two older brothers and sisters that are their like biological children, my parents. And then my dad and mom remember this. I would stand up like 6 years old, little Melinda, and be like, well, I just have to tell you something. If you're going to be mad at me, mom and dad had to have you, but they chose me. And that would shut down the conversation right away. It was like a 1-up, but that's so good. That's so healthy, that chosen piece. Julie, for you, just the process of giving up your child for adoption, what was that for you? And I think it's good to hear from a birth mother about that whole experience of that, and then the years ahead, like my mother, who prayed for me every day that I would be okay. What was your experience after you gave up, Jeremy?
It was very hard. I had always wanted to be a mom, and he was my firstborn, but I knew that God was calling me to do that. And so I had confidence in my decision. I actually never regretted my decision, but I cried a lot. He was born in June, and June was a really, really hard month for me every single year. And I prayed for him a lot. There were no open adoptions back then, but I did request permission to write letters. And so I did actually write every year on his birthday. So I think that was part of the healing process for me, just that I knew my job was to just let him know how much I loved him. Even if I never heard anything back, I just wanted to communicate that to him.
Mm. Now you were reunited 3 years ago. Is that right? About 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Tell me about that, Jeremy. What was the need or desire to reunite with Julie, and Julie, for you, the experience? But Jeremy, let's start with you. Why and what was that like?
I'd always wanted to, ever since I was a child, I'd always expressed to my parents that I wanted to, I guess, find out where I came from. And I didn't know how far that was going to go, if I just wanted to meet and find out the basic questions of like health history and biological history, or if I, really wanted to get to know the person. But that was kind of what I'd find out at the time. And like Julie said, she wrote me letters all throughout the years. In the beginning, multiple per year, and then kind of later on, it was one per year, but always on my birthday. And then when I was 17, my dad took me out, showed me the letters, and started reading through all of them to me. So at that time, it was, it was incredible. It was learning all this stuff, but it was still almost a story. It was still just words on a page.
Mm.
So in meeting Julie, to me, that was kind of closing that chapter and starting something else, starting, I guess, a new journey, a new chapter.
It's good. It's really good. Julie, for you, when it was like, we're going to reunite after 3 years, what was that like for you? And that processing, maybe the night before you were going to meet Jeremy?
It was really hard to process, because when he was around, I would say maybe 18 or 19, I had actually written to his parents asking a couple of questions that I just wanted to know the answer to. And one of them was whether he had come to Christ. I just wanted to know if he had, because he was relinquished to Christian parents. And when I received the answer to my questions and found out that he did know the Lord, it's almost like this weight was lifted, like, okay, I can let go of ever meeting him this side of heaven. If I know that he knows the Lord, then I'll spend eternity with him. So I was able to let that go a little bit. So when he did reach out, it floored me, and I sobbed and sobbed just out of sheer joy. Like, I couldn't believe that my dream had come true and that we were going to meet. And I was so nervous, so nervous. He tells me he wasn't nervous, but I was so nervous to meet him.
There wasn't as much build up for me.
I want to ask this in light of adoption, and Julie, for you, so important that Jeremy knew Jesus, was in a home that knew him, followed him. What is for you sort of this connection of adoption and sort of God's plan for us? Because I think there's something really connected into family and love and adoption and God, and I could go on and on and on about it because I love it, but I just know that there's something very sacred and wonderful about adoption within the context of our faith. Julie, what would you say to that?
I just always wanted him to know how loved he was. I never wanted him to question, if I was abandoning him or rejecting him, because that was the absolute furthest from the truth, because it was because of my love for him and how much I wanted him to feel accepted by his family and be loved by them. And I put a lot of thought into who I would choose for his parents. And it was not random. It was very purposeful, the choice that I made in his family, and just wanting him to have that connection, wanting him to be raised by Christians and to come to know the Lord. And I think it just speaks of God's heart for us too. Like, he has adopted us, and so somebody who has been adopted probably grasps that even more, right? Than those of us who haven't gone through an experience like that, but we all have been adopted. So it's just an incredible piece. Yeah.
Jeremy, you probably have done this, but what would you say to Julie, but also your adopted mom? And I say this because I always say this when I'm talking about my own adoption story, that I say, I have to say something of thanks. What would you say to Julie? And what would you say to your adopted mom as far as the choices that they've made that you are here today?
Um,
And not to put you on the spot, but I am.
it's honestly like I am who I am through both of them, right? Like it's that combination of nature versus nurture that we were talking about. You know, there's so much that I learned and got from my parents, but then finding out there's also so much that I got from Julie as well. So like if it weren't for either of them, I wouldn't be here today. So you kind of owe, or I kind of owe like who I am and everything to both of them.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Julie and Jeremy, for sharing. I think it's a beautiful picture of you together. Uh, it's a wonderful story of, reunion. Just want to say thank you so very much for coming on today, for sharing your story. So encouraged about your relationship, and really excited to see where Jeremy, God is going to take you. And thank you, Julie, so much for your courage and love. So thanks for being with us.
But
The number of COVID-19 cases climb across our country.
Changed. It's all changed. But the Word of God remains unchanged.
You know, I was thinking about my life as a single parent child growing up without a father, and how even in my adult life, the effects of fatherlessness still thread through today. I see them, I notice the patterns and the cycles. And it really was what spurred me on in the beginning to do the work that I do with at-risk youth and with children of low-income housing, and really pouring into their lives because I recognize that void. You see, so many of the foster kids that I work with, their desire is burning for one thing: a forever family. You know, if a family gives a child a sense of grounding, a sense of identity, it establishes worth, a feeling of love, protection, safety, all the things that you can imagine a family can give. And without those, they struggle. And, you know, I think about the importance of spiritually, emotionally adopting those that maybe we can't physically adopt. I encourage you, as you're thinking about your life and where God could be calling you, to think about mentorship in ways that maybe you haven't thought about before, emotionally adopting a young person. You see, when you feel like you come into a place of adoption, you feel a sense of entitlement into the love and the care and the healthy space to be curious, to find out what you're called to do, to make mistakes, and know that there's always a safe place to fall. And isn't that what we all want? And you know, in so many ways, we as believers, we have that. We have that safety net. We have that protection. We have that sense of love. We have our identity because we ourselves are adopted. You know, the Bible says in Galatians 4 verses 4 and 5, "But when the set time has fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. And as sons and daughters of God, we step into the legal right of his love and his protection and his care for us, a sense of identity, a sense of belonging." And I encourage you today, you're listening and maybe you're wondering, how can I serve in bigger and better ways? Think about emotionally adopting someone. Is there a young person in your life without a parent, without parents, that may be struggling and trying to find their way? Ask God if you could be that lighthouse for them, as someone was also for me. You and I are adopted by a loving God, and that's the best news of all. God bless you.
Well, next is a story of an incredible young woman, Tori Petersen. Tori lived in 12 different foster homes growing up, beginning at the age of 4. And now she's doing some incredible work with her husband, which I won't give away so Tori can tell us what she's doing. But Tori, welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you are with me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Tori, let's talk about the beginning. If you can share a little bit about family of origin and then how your experience was in foster care for so many years.
So, when I was 9 years old, my mom told me that I was conceived out of rape. And of course, when you're 9, you don't really understand what that means, other than it kind of answered the question of why I didn't know who my father was for so long. And my mom did have many boyfriends, and I always called them dad. But I didn't understand why my dad continued to change while everyone else's usually stayed the same. And my mom, she struggled with severe mental illness. And I think my mom, she definitely did try her best as a mother. She sacrificed a lot for me. She worked really hard for me. She picked up jobs so that she could be home. She saw it to be a value of being a stay-at-home mom. She really cared about my education. But there just came a point where the mental illness became so bad. And right, that's what generational trauma is. That's what it does. She had hurt from growing up that was just never healed. You know, I think about the resources that we have today, and it's just wild. You know, my mom didn't have those resources. She didn't have social media bringing to light these various mental illnesses that she had. She didn't have support groups around her like that we have modern day that are so helpful to us. So my mom just had a lot of unhealed trauma. She had been trafficked. She had struggled in some prostitution. And so there's just a lot of trauma there. And her mental illness became so harmful to me that I had to go into the foster care system. I went to the foster care system first when I was 4 years old. Eventually, I did end up going back with my mom, and then grew up with her until I was 12 years old. Went back into the foster care system. I lived in 12 different homes. And I moved for various reasons. Sometimes it was my fault. Sometimes I sabotaged it and I didn't want to be with the foster parents. And sometimes it was the foster parents' fault. There was abuse in the home that was brushed under the rug. And I ran track all throughout high school, and I was decent at track. I loved it more because I loved my coach. He was like my consistent adult figure throughout all the moves. He was there. Yeah. And he just became like a friend. So throughout these, 4 years, I'm moving throughout all these homes. And for 3 of those years, there's my track coach. And he's just consistent father figure that I never really had. And in between my junior and senior year, I just moved into another foster home. And my track coach goes, Tori, I think you can win the state track meet. And I think you could actually get a scholarship to college. And I had wanted to go to college, but I had actually just attended an orientation, and they told me how expensive it was going to be. And I was like, oh, maybe not. Maybe I won't go to college. But then it was like, okay, maybe I do have a chance to go to college if I work really hard. And I became a 4-time state champion in track and field.
Wow, way to go, Tori. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Good
and
job.
that was what paid for my education. And then during this time of training, my track coach, he was driving me to and from homes, not any particular home, because I had emancipated out of care. I had chosen to emancipate out of care because I felt like it just wasn't a healthy place for me to be. There was a lot of corruption with caseworkers, a lot of abuse, again, just being brushed under the rug as a foster youth because of the liability that I was considered. So I decided to emancipate. And my track coach, again, was just this support. And he's driving me to and from all these different houses. I was instantly homeless the day I turned 18.
Oh, wow.
And he goes, driving me home from practice, I asked my daughters, he has 2 daughters. I asked my daughters, and they said that they would really like you to be a part of our family.
Oh, that
And
makes me tear, Tori. I'm like tearing. So essentially, like becoming a family, but being adopted into this family with a man who was like a father figure who has helped you. How did you redefine home? Like you didn't have home. Going from foster care, it wasn't home. It was a building in place. But what did home mean to you when you were adopted and brought into this family? What did that mean? Family and home to you?
yeah, I think um, family has always been just this really hard concept, I think, because with family, there's this idea of loyalty. And I think as an adoptee in a former foster youth, you like never truly feel loyal because I still talk to my biological mom. And
Mhm.
when I go home for Christmas, when I go to Scott's, my track coach, for Christmas, I still will go see my mom and I'll still see these other foster families who did support me and love me. And so I always tell people, I just want to make family wherever I go. But I know that with Scott, that's like my forever family. That's the family, that's my home base. That's
Mhm.
who I can go to no matter what. It was just like sometimes it's still so surreal. Like growing up, I thought that I was never gonna have a father to walk me down the aisle. And I did. Um
Wow.
and it just means so much to be given something that you thought you wouldn't have.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get married and you and your husband, like, this is such an amazing part of your story, Tori. Like it's not like it just ended and you're like, okay, now I'm just gonna go on with my life. But you and your husband started something really amazing and expanded your family. And I think it's such a beautiful picture of sort of your own story and opportunity to give others an opportunity. Talk to me about what you're doing now.
So my husband and I became certified foster parents, and
Awesome.
it was wild. We became certified foster parents, and then someone contacted me through social media, and they said, I live in Minnesota, and they said I live in Minnesota, and I know this young man. He came across our church in to some capacity. He knows this woman in our church, and he needs a home. And we live like 2 hours from this woman who had contacted me over social media, and it's so complicated. This young man, he's an immigrant, and his immigration status makes it unable for him to go into the foster care system, even though he's not
Mm.
legally an adult. So he's homeless. He's living out of his car and he's living in public bathrooms where he works. And so I say, I would love to meet him. Do you want us to meet you? Do you want to come here? She comes to our home, brings the young man. He didn't bring any of his things. He said, he says, I'm not going to stay here. I'm not going to stay with these people. And then he gets here and we meet and we have lunch and he goes, actually, I think I want to stay here. I think I like these people. So we drive all the way back 2 hours and we get his book bag, just a book bag of a couple pairs of pants, a t-shirt, and his documents that talk about his immigration status and him being from Liberia and all these things that
Mhm.
I just really know so little about. It's so wild how you can have a similar background as someone, but really know so little about where they come from.
Mhm.
So he's just opened my whole world up to this, to the struggle of immigration, to the struggle of vulnerable youth who immigrate to America. And yeah, he's our son. We officially adopt him in February, and we just
Wow.
adore him. He's a great kid.
So is this so you run a local nonprofit focused on local adoption and you have two biological children, one adopted son, and you're also a foster parent. Come on. Like it's amazing. It's really amazing what you're doing in light of like all that I think that's the story, Tori, that you could have been so angry at your life situation and angry at the system, and sometimes it'd be like rightfully so, but you've taken all of your life experience and are making this choice. That is so good.
Well, and I was angry for a really long
Right.
time. I remember in high school, I was really, really mean. And then, so my 11th foster home, the foster parents, they proclaimed Jesus's name. And I had a lot of questions about God at that point in my journey. And so these people are proclaiming Jesus's name, and then they're abusing their kids behind closed doors. And so I was very confused about, who is this Jesus guy who is supposed to be so loving and so comforting and so good, but the people who proclaim him do not look like the man I'm imagining, the man that I hear these stories about in scripture. And so I was really bitter, really angry. And then I moved to my 12th foster home after that abuse had been reported. I moved to my 12th foster home, and it was a single mom who just loved the Lord. She was so vibrant for him. And I look back and I really think that God wanted to show me that contrast. Like, we can be Christians and we can use it as a mask. We can use it as a way to make ourselves look good and cover up all the bad stuff we're doing. Or we can be Christians and we can confess the bad parts of ourselves, and we can proclaim Jesus' name and also walk out our faith in a way that looks like him. And so this woman just really, there were a lot of people in my life, like my track coach and like mentors, who proclaimed Jesus' name and really did look like him. But I think this woman and the contrast that she showed me in my foster home was the start of that anger kind of fading away.
Wow. That's really important. I think it's important for anybody who follows Jesus that, the influence and impact we have with people that come into our lives in and out, how we represent Jesus. Are we loving and kind and following him in the way that he lived out his life, with great empathy and sacrifice and service and justice? Like, those are important things. I want to end the conversation, Tori, with, for somebody who is a young person who's really struggling, maybe coming out of the foster care system, maybe who, young person who's adopted and struggling with identity, what would you say to them to encourage them today? Just practical things, or even with following Jesus, what would you say to encourage them if they're really, really having a hard time?
I think the thing that encouraged me so much, it was something that people told me my whole life, but I didn't connect it to God until later. But that idea that Jesus has a purpose and a plan for us, that our suffering is not wasted, that it can be used to help others, that it is used to bring glory to our Heavenly Father. That is what sustains me even in my suffering today, because all of the trauma is not healed. I still have triggers. I'm still hurting day to day. But in that suffering, when I think about what Jesus did for me, and when I think about being eyes to eyes with him someday, it's all worth it.
Wow. Tori Petersen, thank you so much. Your courage, your faithfulness, your resilience, your perseverance. Wow. Such an inspiration to me as I just meeting you, but getting to know you. Thankful for the work that you're doing, your open arms and heart in loving kids. Grateful for you. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
It's a special honor to be on See Her Love with my adopted daughter today, and to be able to share the good word with you. And the word for today, of course, is adoption. And if you are someone who was humanly adopted, and maybe you are struggling with that a little bit, I want to encourage you today. Because the good word says that, first of all, God knows you. He knows each and every one of us. The psalmist in Psalm 139 expressed it this way, that even when we were still in our mother's womb, God was the one who knitted us together and who watched the whole process. and who through all of our life has been watching us and thinks about us. And the psalmist says, it is so wonderful to know that your thoughts about me. God knows you. And then the Apostle Paul, in the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 1, verse 4, he says these words, even before he made the world, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy and without fault in his eyes. God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus Christ. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him much pleasure. Isn't it incredible to know that not only does God know you, but God chose you? What a wonderful feeling, what a wonderful position to be a chosen person. We use this term with human adoption today. Chosen children. Even Melinda understood that as a very little girl. When she could just begin to reason, we would sometimes hear her say to her older brother and sister, Mommy and Daddy had to take you, but they chose me. Well, we did indeed. And what a wonderful situation to be in, to be especially chosen. The good word goes on to say, it's not only that God knows us, but God also chose us, and he adopted us into his family through Jesus Christ. So if you today are a follower of Jesus, you are adopted too. And if you're a human adopted person, you can say you've been adopted twice. God knows you. God chose you. And God has even adopted you when you come to him through his Son, Jesus Christ. That is incredible love. Incredible love that he knows you, chose you, and adopted you.
Well, that was a really, really special show for me, especially as a child who was adopted. And I continually am grateful for my birth mom, Tori, who gave me up and made that courageous decision, and for my mom and dad who adopted me, Paul and Diane, who expanded their hearts and family to include me. Forever grateful. I think one of the takeaways after listening to Andrew's story and Tori and Jeremy and Julie's story is that, yes, for a lot of adopted kids, we struggle with identity and belonging. But there was always this constant reminder that Jesus is with us, was with us through that time, that there are people that understand you, that you're not alone. And so I'm encouraged by that. And I hope you are too, that you're not alone and that God is with you each day of the week and each week of the year. Well, for more information about our guests and resources about adoption and support, go to seehearlove.com. My dad has written a blog to encourage you if you have adopted kids or you're adopted. And our wonderful sponsor, Canadian Bible Society, has resources of verses to help you in your journey. And here's something I just want to say, that even if your family of origin is tough and your circumstances were tough, if you were in foster care, your adopted family wasn't that great, God loves you. He knows you, and he is ready and able to redeem your story today. And as you choose him, as you choose to be courageous and live a life that is good and that you are living out your calling, know that you are seen, you are heard, and you are deeply, deeply loved by God.